this link. I have the pleasure of introducing today's webcast, Failing at the Finish Line, How Law Firms Lose Prospective Clients at the Front Door. But before we get started today, I certainly want to thank our sponsor, Thomas Reuters. Thomas Reuters is an advanced, comprehensive payroll service designed for firms who want to simplify their payroll processing and who value personal service. Today's presenter is Tina Johnston, who is a product manager at FindLaw. Tina's primary focus is on conversion. She develops marketing solutions that help law firms turn passive visitors to actual contacts. Her expertise starts the moment a legal consumer visits a website and finishes when that consumer goes through the firm's intake process to become a signed client. She has experience covering strategy as well as execution of both online and traditional campaigns with particular knowledge of the digital marketing landscape. Tina has led studies on the behaviors of legal consumers and law firm client intake processes. She has spoken about legal marketing issues to attorneys at events nationwide. She has extensive experience working with small businesses to create and implement marketing and media strategies. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this presentation over to Tina. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you so much, and I'm so glad to be here today. We're going to get going here. So I'm going to be talking about failing at the finish line. And before we dive into that, I just wanted to share a little bit more information about FindLaw. So for those of you that are not familiar with FindLaw, part of Thomson Reuters, we provide legal marketing solutions that deliver results. We have more than 10 million monthly visitors to our legal information site, findlaw.com, which is the largest online legal resource for consumers. We also offer integrated and data-driven marketing solutions that are exclusively designed for law firms. And within that, our solutions help to attract the right prospects, engage with them online, connect with them, and convert them into clients. So what we're going to be talking about today is really that last part of the funnel and what goes well and also what doesn't go well and where this can be improved. So on today's agenda, first I'm going to be covering a little bit more about understanding the intake problem. And so when I say it's a problem, why is it a problem, and why are not all but many firms poor at it, and then also covering some easy solutions, some practical tips and advice for how to improve this at your particular firm. So you've probably felt this way before. There are some days when you do everything right, but at the last minute you choke. And of course, it's frustrating when you're out golfing, but I'm making a presumption that all of us on the call, none of us are PGA Tour professionals. So missing a putt isn't going to have a huge impact on our businesses. But when we think about this in terms of lost clients, I'm curious to know, do you have an idea at your firms of what your conversion rate is? So when you have those potential clients contacting your firm, how many of those potentials become clients of the firm? And whatever that rate is, what does that rate impact have on the bottom line? So that's the topic that we're talking about today. That's really the problem that we're talking about today. And what I can say from the research that we've done, which I'll cover in a little bit, is that the issue of intake, potential client intake, it's really pervasive in terms of the number of firms that aren't successfully converting as many of those potential clients as they could be. And the impact that that has on the bottom line directly, as well as on that firm's reputation, is pretty vast. So I'm going to cover that today as well. So the problem, which we talked about a little bit already, is, and if you look at this funnel, it's really kind of a basic marketing construct. There's a lot of activity that firms generally do in terms of business development, client development, really getting people to know about the firm, understanding that, A, the firm exists, B, here's what the firm does and how, we could potentially help these clients. So again, lots of activities to help attract those potential clients to the firm. Generally, what we see most often is to the firm website. And I'm including referrals in that. We know that when potential clients get referrals, more often than not, they get that firm name, but they're also going online to check out the firm a little bit more and learn more about them. We see that there's also a lot of activity that is being done in terms of engaging those potential clients. And when we say engage in this particular context, that means helping those potential clients understand more about the firm, again, mostly online through things like social media, through blogs, through videos, lots of different ways that people can learn more about what the firm does. And, more often than not, that results in that potential client making contact with the firm, whether through phone calls, emails, website contact forms, web chat, lots of different ways that people reach out to firms. And where we see the breakdown is in this last step. So, and more often than not, what we see is that firms are unfortunately failing to appropriately or promptly respond to those contacts. And at that point, that potential client is lost. They've moved on to another firm. So the bottom line is that firms are failing at intake. And I feel like that's a pretty bold statement to make. And the reason why we know this is that we've done a vast amount of research in this area. We've talked to a lot of law firms. We've also talked with a lot of legal consumers, and these are people that have had a legal issue that they've had to deal with within the last 12 months, where they've been in touch and contacting firms to try to get their issues resolved. We've also consulted with experts within the legal industry and specifically within the kind of intake specialty. And we've conducted our own secret shop so that we could get a better understanding of what this really looks like in terms of the potential client experience. So we've done secret shops in 2014, 2016. We've done secret shops this year as well. And what we've found from those secret shops is more often than not, it's been little to no follow-up, a lack of a response, the poor data collection. So what's happened and what we've seen is a really I'd say consistent pattern of inconsistency. And so when we talk about intake deficiencies, they do tend to land in one of four categories. The first one is little to no urgency. We've done a lot of research, as I just mentioned, and one of the key findings that we have from our research, and it actually probably doesn't surprise most of the folks on the call, is that consumers want and expect a pretty quick response when they reach out. So we've seen that 48% of consumers expect a response within 24 hours, 16% expect a response within 1 hour. So you do the math, and that's 64% that are expecting that firm is going to get back to them within 24 hours or less. And what we found in our research is despite this expectation of immediacy, what most firms do is pretty much exactly the opposite of that. What we have seen from our research is that 33% of firms didn't respond to voicemail within 24 hours, and 50% of firms didn't respond to emails or online forms within 24 hours. And so, again, I think those numbers are really staggering if you think of how wide the gap is between what those potential clients are expecting and the experience that is being provided by many firms. There are a lot of reasons for this. I think a few that, kind of are top of mind. First, I think that a lot of attorneys kind of think that their name, their expertise, their reputation is enough for them to gain clients. And while it's definitely true that, potential clients, they want to work with a firm and work with attorneys that have expertise in their areas, but when they're considering who to contact, that's one thing they look at. When they start making contact and actually consider who they're going to hire, the lack of response is something that is very noticeable to consumers, and so I think that's something that's important to call out. Another thing that's really interesting in our research is that what we've seen is over 75% of consumers are still making contact via phone. And we're going to touch on that a little bit more later, but I think the key takeaway from that particular data point is that it's really, really important to make sure that there's a plan in place to not only answer those calls, but if they have to go to voicemail, that there's a plan to quickly get back to those individuals as well. I talk about this topic a lot with a lot of different groups all across the country, and I can share one story that I had heard last year speaking with an attorney that's at a firm, and I had asked, what is the typical response time for your firm? How does that work? And what they had told me is that when the calls come in initially, they get sent to the appropriate attorney, depending on the practice area, depending on the need. But what was really interesting was part of that response when I asked that individual, well, how often or how quickly do you call these people back? And what the response was really kind of shocking, because this person said, well, I try to get back to them within 24 hours, but if I'm not able to call back within 24 hours, I actually don't call them back at all, because I feel like that makes me look worse than if I had called them 3 days later. And the reason why I share that story is I think it really illustrates the kind of the viewpoint that may be prevalent in some firms of, you either call them back right away or not at all. But yet what we've seen in our research is getting back to them is critical. And certainly after 24 hours is not a great time frame, but I still would definitely advise to call those people back, even if it takes longer than that 24-hour period of time. All right, the next area, the next intake deficiency, is little to no data collection. And one of the things that I want to talk about when I say the term data collection, the first reaction I get from a lot of folks is that, well, data collection is really something that large business enterprises are doing. That's not something that my firm does. And even if you're in a larger firm and you are doing it, I think there are ways to look at it and ways to make sure that you're really optimizing what's being done. If you're at a mid-sized or small firm, I certainly would say that this applies as well. And collecting that data is one way that can really help your firm have a better understanding of what is happening within the firm in terms of business development. So I think one of the biggest key points with data collection is having a consistent way to collect that information. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about practical steps later, but some of the things that you can look and think about collecting are, simple things like the preferred, contact information, method of contact. Of course, some sort of summary of what the potential matter is, date and time when that individual contacted the firm. I think you can also make sure that you're tracking how those potential clients have heard about the firm. So we've heard in our research over and over that attorneys and firm managers and firm administrators feel that they don't have a great handle on what marketing is working and what marketing is not working. And by collecting this information consistently, especially where people are hearing about the firm, can really be helpful to start to hone in on where that marketing spend is most effective and where it could, possibly be dialed back. I think another thing to call out, and we'll get into this more later, is that the lack of consistent data collection, it not only does it put the firm at a disadvantage in terms of being able to understand more about the business and what kind of leads you're getting, but it really has a big impact on the customer service aspect for a firm. So imagine if you put yourself in the potential client's shoes, they've called the firm, they've left a message with their information, they receive a call back from someone else at the firm, maybe a few hours, maybe a day later asking for the same information. They come in for an appointment and they have to repeat themselves again. So it creates a very frustrating experience. And you can see the quote on the slide. Every time I call my firm, I don't want to have to explain how my husband died in a work accident. So if you think of the issues why people need legal services, many times it's not for something fun or exciting. It's oftentimes something traumatic and negative has happened in their lives. And by having to keep repeating themselves, it just really compounds the negative impact that they're feeling. I have kind of an interesting story related to this. It's not about the legal industry, but in terms of that data collection and not having one true source of data, I bought a house a couple of years ago. I got a new mortgage with this home, which is, fairly typical. And, after I had, closed on the home and getting, everything set up, and I went online to, make my payment like most people do. And what I found was I didn't have online access to my own mortgage account, which was really weird. But I thought I'll call the bank. We'll get this shored up. It won't be a big deal. And this is through one of the larger banks, whose name I will not mention. But I called the mortgage department. Kind of went through my situation of I'm trying to pay online. I can't seem to even see my account online. Can you turn on that access for me? And they said, well, that's unfortunate, but you're actually going to have to call our online banking division, and here's their number. We can transfer you. So I get sent over to the online banking division, kind of go through my spiel of how I, just want to pay my, my payment online. And what they said to me, this might not be surprising to you, but what they said to me was, well, we actually can't do that. You're going to have to contact the mortgage division. And this went back and forth literally for about 3 weeks of, talking to different people in both departments before I finally was able to speak to the right, management people to get that account access enabled. And so the reason why I bring up that story is I can tell you from personal experience just how incredibly frustrating that was. And that was just for accessing my mortgage. It's something that was, obviously an inconvenience to me, but it wasn't something that was going to change my life. And so again, just in kind of thinking in the context of most of the folks that are contacting law firms do have these life-changing issues, and what is that experience like for them when when the people that they're talking to don't have the right information, or it's always different every time. All right, so the third area, the third intake deficiency, is little to no client satisfaction. So we touched already on just some of the challenges that come up when that data is not in the same place, when different people at the firm have different information or no information. There are a couple of other facets to client satisfaction as well. One of them, interestingly enough, that's connected to the data topic of data and data storage is you may have some potential clients that have contacted the firm. There might be several weeks or even several months that go by before they, and these potential clients might not have even decided what they want to do. They just sort of fall off the map. And then they call the firm back out of the blue. And they say, well, don't you remember? I spoke with so-and-so. I thought they had all of my information. And so that's another area where if you have it all stored in one place, that you can easily get to it and be able to see the details of what was discussed, even if it's, weeks or months later. We've seen, in terms of client satisfaction, that another, frustration is just simply talking to too many different people. So if you're able to have a, system or process at your firm where you're ensuring that they just get to the right people right away, that can be really helpful. A lack of empathy. This one is really interesting too. So when we did our research and we asked consumers, what's really important to you when you're considering hiring an attorney, I mentioned earlier, of course, areas of expertise, and having that expertise is really important. But when they're considering who to hire, they also want empathy and honesty. And that goes not only for the attorney that they're working with, but really what is it like for them at every stage of the process and with every interaction they have with each person at the firm. And we see that the firms that tend to be most successful with this really, from the very first moment of contact all the way through to when that matter has been closed, that client has a good customer service experience with whomever they are dealing with. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, and then the last area that I'm going to talk about just in terms of intake deficiencies is little to no follow-up. So a couple of quotes on the screen. 95% of firms do not follow up with a second phone call. And then this second quote I thought was really interesting. We don't do a follow-up. We let them kind of migrate back to us. I've talked to a lot of attorneys and other firm staff, and I'd say that in general, the feeling is that, well, this potential client, they either want me or they don't want me. And so therefore, I think that really feeds into why there's this lack of follow-up. What we found, though, in our research is that while there's a, significant number of people that they have a legal need, they take action immediately, over 40% are going to take between 1 week and up to over a year before they actually hire an attorney. So there is a significant number of folks that really are kind of just, not quite sure what to do. They're not ready to really move forward yet. But by having no follow-up in place, it really guarantees that the firm is not going to obtain their business. When we've talked to firms that do this well, one example of a firm that we spoke with recently, what they said is it's not a complicated process. They said, I called the person, and all I say is I just wanted to check in, make sure that you have all of the answers you needed, see if you have any questions. And simply by, implementing that step, they've been able to boost their rate of retainer by over 25%. So I think the amount of effort that something like this takes is relatively low to the amount of return that you're going to get on it. All right, so when we think about this from the lens of that potential client, a few different things that we heard in the process of our research. First, just sit down and talk with me and not look like you are hurried. I would probably leave one message and then wait to hear back for a day or so and then probably call someone else. And then the last person, there was no communication, and I think he was too busy. I was a minor thing for him, so I would not go back for anything. So I think that's a pretty bold statement. 59% of callers refuse to do business with a company if the initial call isn't handled to their satisfaction. And I mentioned earlier, when you think about this from the lens of the consumer, that potential client, not only are they not having a great experience, they're actually having a pretty bad experience with that firm. But as you probably are very aware, most people, when they have like an okay experience or a decent experience, they're probably not going online to talk about it or telling their friends about it. But if they have a really negative experience, they're definitely telling other people. They might be telling them just through, phone conversations, through emails. More often than not, it's happening on social media, whether it's through networks like Facebook where you're just posting to your friends. A lot of times what we're starting to see more and more is that people are posting, reviews on sites like Google, on Yelp, on Facebook reviews. And, these are folks that they haven't even signed with the firm, but they had such a poor experience that they're now sharing about that experience online. So the impact to the firm's brand and reputation, when you think about it through the lens of intake, it's actually pretty vast. And I think that's something for you to think about. And you may know this already, but I think it's also something to really start to, if you haven't, been able to get buy-in from the firm, owners, for example, to talk more about here's why having, a good process in place is so important, because it has a very broad-ranging and far-reaching impact on the firm as a business. So in terms of the financial impact, I want to walk through an example that I've got, and I, definitely realize that this is going to be, different numbers specific to your firms that I think you can sort of mentally plug in as I walk through this. But in this example, we have a firm where they're getting about 200, leads, prospects per month. Their rate of conversion is 25% of those 200 are becoming clients. The average case value is $3,000. And so if you do the math, that's around $150,000 a month in revenue that's coming in. Now, if this same firm was able to, devote more energy and continue to improve their intake practices to the point where their conversion rate goes from 25% to 35%, what you can see is that the impact is pretty large. In fact, over each month, it's over $60,000 increase in revenue just by improving their intake practices. And that is, when you think about it, it's improving that intake piece. It's not spending a penny more on marketing, on business development. And so I think the impact financially of doing this well, again, can be really positive for you and for those that you're working with at the firm. All right, so in terms of best practices, we've kind of covered a little bit of this, but I want to talk in more depth in each of these areas. First of all, urgency. We've covered this before, but I just think it's so important and so critical that we talk about it again. What we've seen in our research is that over 60% of people that have a legal need, they're going to end up hiring the first attorney that they contact. And, you know, in some ways, those potential clients are the firms to lose, but it's really easy to lose them if those messages aren't being returned. So answering that phone as quickly as possible, we actually recommend within 3 rings or fewer. Getting back to those, you know, voicemails right away, and that includes not only voicemail but email as well. I've heard a few folks tell me that they actually don't value email and website leads as much as phone leads. I personally would advise that I think that every lead is just as important regardless of the method of contact. And so, you know, I think having a process in place for answering the phone quickly, responding to messages quickly is very important. The second area is customer service. So I think some of this really it's not specific to the legal industry. It's really just best practices for any industry in terms of customer service. Be polite, be courteous, demonstrating active listening skills. And we mentioned this earlier, but showing that understanding, showing that empathy, understanding that many people that are coming to the firm are probably not in a great place, and being able to really just empathize with them can go a long way. And along with that, what we advise, you know, particularly for attorneys that we speak with, is be honest. If a case has no merits, people value that honesty, and they might, you know, obviously not sign up with their firm, but that is going to increase the possibility that they're going to get referrals from that individual if they were treated well during that whole process. The third one is tenacity. So we mentioned this earlier, making follow-up a part of daily tasks. So one question that I get a lot is, well, I think that's great, Tina, but how do I actually do that? What's the right, you know, timing? What's the right cadence to do that? And I generally, you know, advise that it's going to depend on your specific, you know, area of practice. It's going to depend on, you know, what part of the country you live in. But what I do recommend is that you start a process in place. And usually it's something like, you know, maybe that first follow-up is a phone call. And then a day or two later, or actually after that phone call, is some sort of email follow-up if you're not able to reach that person, just to say, hey, we just tried to reach you via phone, wanted to check in, and then a day or two later, there's another follow-up. And those follow-ups tend to space out over time. So if you're at, say, week 3 or 4, maybe you're following up once a week, but especially after that initial contact that the potential client makes, of trying to have those follow-ups occur pretty regularly to be able to catch them. Sometimes, as you probably know, people are just busy. They're working. They have other things going on. They're not able to get to their phones right away. But having that process in place is really critical, and then documenting that process so that you can start to track over time. Well, when, you know, just as an example, when we did our follow-ups every 2 days, we saw a higher conversion rate than if we only did it every 4 days. So being able to track that is really critical. And then the last thing is data collection. And again, we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, but really having a consistent process to collect the data and use the data, but also having one central place where that data is stored. I think there are some firms that are actually decent about collecting the data, but it might be living in different places. It might be on, you know, in someone's Outlook on their local computer. It might be on Post-it notes or on, you know, legal pads that are in a file somewhere. It might be on someone's Excel documents that are, you know, again, on someone's local computer, but not accessible by anyone else at the firm. And so having one centralized location for all of that information can really help in terms of making it accessible and making sure that everyone that needs to get access to the information has access to the information. All right, so we've talked a lot about these different steps in terms of what firms are already doing well with a lot of business development activities, you know, generating more interest and awareness of the firms, getting people to contact the firms. And, certainly we hope that by implementing the practical steps that we've talked about, that there's going to be more success in actually getting people from that point of contact to working with the firm. So we've talked a lot already about some practical steps to get there, and just a few things that I want to cover that are more specific to FindLaw is we do have some tools in place that we think are helpful. I want to call out too that, I certainly understand that there are many great companies out there, lots of different companies that do this type of thing. So whether it's us or if you have other, businesses that you're working with, I think the most critical thing is to get something in place if you don't have something in place today. So with us at FindLaw, we have a product called Prospect Manager. We find that for the vast majority of our customers, they feel that it's something that really helps them save time. One of our firms actually said that it saves them 25%, cuts down on their time by 25% of having to manage the leads that are coming through. And particularly with our products, there are a lot of reports as well that help firms gauge their effectiveness in terms of marketing. And so you can see some of the reports that are here. Again, it's a great way to be able to track all of your prospects in one system. I know some firms use, whether it's this system or another system where you have all of that information for things like conflict checks, at least as an initial, I know it doesn't cover everything, but as an initial conflict check, and then also, of course, checking in with the individuals that are at your firm too. So again, with Prospect Manager, we feel that there are a lot of great ways that this is helping our customers, and we would definitely encourage you to think about something like this. This particular product is all cloud-based, so it's accessible whether you're in the office or you're somewhere else. Of course, everyone has their own login credentials that are used with it as well. And then the other thing I want to talk about from simply a FindLaw perspective is something called Voice Connect. So this service ensures that all prospects talk to someone immediately. And what we've seen is that because so many people are making contact still via phone call, that even just by talking with someone who can take in some of their basic information, potentially transfer them over to, the right attorney if they match certain criteria, it just really helps to stop that shopping process. So we talked about that a little bit earlier, that the vast majority of consumers that are looking to hire, they will hire pretty quickly, but if there's no response and they're not able to even talk to anyone, they're basically just calling down a list of attorneys that they have in hand. And a few things that I wanted to share in terms of what our customers are saying about these two products. I'm not going to read all of the quotes, but I think one that's really interesting is with Prospect Manager, some of our customers have talked about how, again, it's just really helped them maximize their time that they can then use for things like litigation. They're not using as, much time and effort on, potentials where the case just wasn't probably a great fit for the firm. Being able to see all of that activity in one place is really helpful. And then having that call answering service so that if there are any gaps in coverage, that there's an easy way to fill those gaps that doesn't break the bank. All right, so some key takeaways. First, like we've mentioned through this presentation, we know that intake at many firms is a significant issue, but we think that there are a lot of easy practical steps that you can take to improve how that intake process is working at the firm. And at the same time, we think that, by implementing those processes, it can also help the firm to more, effectively track their marketing effectiveness, have a better understanding of where those leads are coming from, how that marketing money is being spent, and what's bringing in the best return on investment. Of course, at FindLaw, we think that our products, Prospect Manager and Voice Connect, are easy solutions. But I think the main takeaway that I would encourage everyone on the call to really think about is, what is our intake process like today? What is one area that we can start to think about improving? Focus on that area, and then as that area improves, what is the next area that we should look at improving, so that it doesn't feel like you have to change everything at once, but how can you make incremental positive changes over time? So with that, I think we're going to now move on to our Q&A section.
All right, great, good deal. So, Tina, I think you may have answered this question already, but Michelle has a question about the percentage of potential clients that hire the first attorney who calls them back. You mentioned it earlier in the presentation. She just wants to clarify what the percentage was.
Oh, it's over 60%.
Okay. All right. Great. Over 60%. And then we've got another one. Someone's interested in a copy of the Secret Shopper Survey.
Oh, that's a great question. I think we can make that available. I will have to double check on that, but I will definitely let you know.
Okay, great. Great. That'll be fantastic. All right, we've got a few more questions here that I have in hand. And the first one is going to be, if I can get to it again. Oh, wow. Got quite a... All right, so here we go. Have you run into any type of situations where you've seen client data that hasn't been stored in a central place? How do you fix that, and what did you do?
Oh, I mean, I feel like I see that quite often, actually, with most of the firms that I've talked with. I think at first it's really understanding where are all of the places that the data is currently being stored. And, again, most often it does seem like it's on, certain like individual, laptops, computers. And then it's deciding, well, where do we want to have this stored? I mentioned earlier there are cloud-based solutions where all of the data can exist and everyone has a login. I've seen some firms that have a centralized server within the firm where it's everyone that needs access to that central server has access, and that's where all of the information is stored. So I think there are a few different options. I think, like I'd mentioned, probably the least effective is if everyone just has their own set of information and none of it's connected. That's where you start to see the breakdown, especially in terms of client service and even just some gaps with conflict checks, things like that too.
Yeah. Okay, great. So another one is I use Outlook emails myself to document each incoming potential new client and each new step. It's only in my Outlook. When I'm out of office, no one else can see it. What can I use for a more central area?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, which kind of relates to what we talked about earlier. Obviously we have a product at FindLaw that does that, where you can store all of that information within that product. There are also, I've seen firms where they might have, say, an Excel document that is on a server. So instead of it being on the local hard drive, it's on a server that's still, on premise at the firm, but where everyone has access to it. I'd say, some firms, I've seen them, a little bit more or less on the technological side, but having printouts of every single, potential case that comes through that are in a centralized filing cabinet. So I think there are a few different options. I would definitely say, for that particular case, I'd try to see if there's someone else at the firm that can basically be a backup. So you at least have a couple of people where if someone is out, another person has line of sight to the activity that's happening in terms of leads coming in.
Okay, great. We do have plenty of time for more questions, so please submit your questions to all participants or all panelists. And while we're waiting on those questions, I've got one more. Regarding follow-up emails, what should the email say if you have a potential client come in? How should we follow up with them?
I think it depends on where they are in that process. So, obviously if it's before an appointment, I think even something as simple as an appointment reminder can be really helpful so that people don't forget, you don't have no-shows. If they've had that consultation appointment and they're just on the fence, like it seems like it's a good case, but that potential client just hasn't committed to services yet, I think it can be fairly simple in terms of the language, something, just as an example, thank you for coming in on X date to meet with attorney, XYZ. We just wanted to check in and see if you have any additional questions that we can answer for you or if you're ready to move forward with us. So I think that the language can be simple. And quite honestly, if you think about the way that just in general, not only legal consumers, but consumers in general, the very short attention spans given today's digital landscape. If it's too long, I think people won't read past the first paragraph, so I try to keep it succinct.
Okay, great, fantastic. We still have some time for some questions. If no one else has any additional questions, I guess we can just give everybody the gift of time. Tina, is there anything else that you want to state or before we close it out today?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you to ALA for having me today. I certainly enjoyed it. And thank you to everyone that attended the call today. I really appreciate you taking time to listen in.
Yes, this has been great. And we certainly want to thank our sponsor, Thomson Reuters. And this actually concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at legalmarketplace.alanet.org. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with this link. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts. And thank you so much, Tina. Have a super day.